Hi everybody, this is Maureen Sweeney from the University of Maryland Carey School of Law. Today we're going to be talking about philosophical frameworks for evaluating immigration policy. Now, immigration law and policy are basically about deciding who gets to belong on a temporary or permanent basis to a national political community. In simple terms, who gets to join the community and why? Why this person and not somebody else? There are lots of levels for argument or discussion about immigration issues. You can argue on the level of efficiency or humanity or cost-benefit analysis, moral acceptability. But there's a fundamental level on which it's really helpful to identify what kind of framework somebody is using to evaluate the policy. As policymakers and advocates, it's helpful for us to be able to identify these frameworks so that we can understand the people that we're talking with and also develop the most effective arguments that will speak to them within a framework that they understand and accept. Let me share my screen here. In 2014, Professor Kit Johnson wrote an article called Theories of Immigration Law, in which she developed descriptions of 4 different types of theories, 4 different answers to the question, what is the legitimate goal of immigration law? And that's what we're going to talk about today, because I think they're really helpful in helping us sort out what kinds of arguments people use. So the first framework that she identifies is that of individual rights, that immigration law, migration, should maximize the individual's right to liberty. That right to liberty might look like a right to equal and full opportunity, or to freedom from persecution, freedom of religion, association, all the sorts of individual rights that we recognize from the Bill of Rights. That's the framework on which we're talking about. She uses the example of medical tourism. And the question is whether somebody should be able to come to a country where they can get better medical care on a temporary basis to access that care. That would be an argument based in the individual's need for the medical care and their right to health. So that's an argument based in individual rights. The next framework is that of domestic national interests. The question here is, does the migration further the interests of the current citizens of the receiving country? This, of course, is a utilitarian calculus, which is going to look at the greatest good for the greatest number. In terms of what the interests are, they can be any kind of national interests. They can be argued as economic, social, cultural, security, lots of different kinds of interests. But as long as the interests that are being considered are those of the current citizens of the country, then that's an appeal to domestic national interests. This will look familiar to people who've been paying attention to the Trump administration. This is very often the justification that is used for the immigration policies that the administration has put in effect. There are also domestic interest arguments that are being made right now in favor of the DACA program, because people who have DACA are disproportionately represented in the medical field and are serving the interests of other American citizens in the pandemic. So that's also an argument that's based in domestic interest. The next framework is that of national values. And the question there is, does migration help foster or promote ideals or values of the receiving nation? And rather than a kind of cost-benefit look at the domestic interests that we were just talking about, this is a little more theoretical, if you will, and appeals to things like the free market or entrepreneurship, democratic governance, freedom of religion, protection of human rights, these kinds of ideals or values. And the question is, does a particular policy foster or promote those kinds of ideals? The J-1 visa, which is a cultural exchange visa, is an obvious example of a kind of visa that appeals to national values, the idea being that this would promote American values in the world by having people come on exchanges to the US. And finally, the last framework is that of global interests. The question here is, does migration maximize the interests of the global community of nations or of individuals globally? This is a framework that obviously acknowledges the interconnectedness of regional and global nations, neighbors, and is also utilitarian, like domestic interests, but with a wider lens, where the good of anyone on the planet is relevant, not just the citizens of the country. So we have our four theories: individual rights, domestic national interests, national values, and global interests. And now you can do this little analytical experiment at home. You can find some piece of immigration advocacy or justification or even an attack on an immigration policy and see if you can identify which one or more of these frameworks is at issue and is being used. And then find arguments against that position, whatever it is, in the same framework. And then, as step two, find some arguments for and against the policy in one of the other frameworks. So this will help us to both understand others with whom we are debating about immigration policy, but also to find the arguments that are most persuasive to our audience. Thank you.